Does this warning that has just been issued in the last few seconds, does that mean that the IDF are about to start attacking civilian infrastructure in northern Gaza?
This warning is not new. Israel warned the people in the Gaza Strip 2 weeks ago, originally asked 24 hours to vacate from the northern Gaza Strip because the hostilities are going to come. We've given over 2 weeks because we take very seriously our obligations under international law to do everything we can to keep civilians out of harm's way.
Of course, the first deadline was 24 hours. The first deadline was
24 hours. Yes, exactly. So this is repeating a warning that was given 2 weeks ago. So in order to give the people of Gaza ample time to move out of areas where there's going to be very heavy fighting because Hamas has embedded itself deep underpopulated areas. As part of this operation that Israel is going to move ahead with in response to the October 7th massacre, let's remember it's only been 3 weeks since Hamas murdered 1,400 people in the worst terror attack since 9/11. Israel is going to go in to destroy the terror organization that committed this massacre. Now, what's the problem?
Sorry, just to be clear then, the answer to the question was, are you reissuing the warning because the IDF, the Israel Defense Force, is about to target civilian infrastructure? Is that why the warning has just been issued in the last few seconds?
No, Israel is issuing this warning because we're going to target military infrastructure that is embedded underneath civilian infrastructure. We have a whole network of tunnels inside the Gaza City, for example, that Hamas has built underneath homes, under roads, under schools, under hospitals. Just yesterday, we released intelligence showing that Hamas's command bunker is in fact located underneath the Shifa hospital in Gaza. Hamas is using the fuel that it has stockpiled in order to ventilate its tunnels under the hospital instead of releasing it for the ventilators in the hospitals themselves. So we're targeting Hamas infrastructure. We have no interest in targeting civilian infrastructure. The problem is Hamas is deliberately using the people of the Gaza Strip as human shields. And so we're asking people to get out of the way. We've given them more than 2 weeks' notice, which is ample and I believe unprecedented in the history of international warfare as far as warnings go, so that we can target the terrorists who perpetrated the October 7th massacre while not hurting the civilians.
I should reiterate, Eylon, that the first flee northern Gaza warning gave 1.1 million people only 24 hours to evacuate. And then what we saw was international pressure brought upon the Israelis to extend that deadline. You mentioned there the Al-Shifa hospital. Last week I interviewed Dr. Ghassan Abu Sittar. He is a British-Palestinian doctor working with Médecins Sans Frontières. He is now working at the Al-Shifa hospital. He says that within the hospital's remit, within the area of the hospital, there are hundreds, if not thousands of people sheltering, that they are overwhelmed with casualties from Israeli bombing, as well as routine patients, so women giving birth, babies on incubators, elderly people needing care. What do you expect those people to do? They can't move, can they?
You know, it's only been a week since a Hamas rocket hit a hospital in Ashkelon in Israel. It hit the maternity ward. Thankfully, nobody was hurt because Israel had taken the move of moving all the incubators and the mothers, pregnant mothers, into the basement of the hospital as a precaution. Now, of course, that can't happen in Gaza because the basement of the Shifa hospital is used by Hamas as its command center. They're using the people of the Gaza Strip as human shields. We don't want to hurt them. Our war is against Hamas. Our war is against the terror organization that murdered 1,400 people, that beheaded, burned whole families alive, raped little girls so brutally it broke their bones, that tortured and mutilated people. Our war is not against the people of Gaza. That's why we're asking them to get out of the way so that we can target the ISIS-plus terror organization that committed the October 7th massacre. We have no illusion that moving so many people is difficult.
Mr. Levy, what happens to the 400,000 civilians in northern Gaza, including those at the biggest hospital, the Al-Shifa, who cannot move? There is always in any population a group of people that cannot move because they are elderly, they're disabled, they are ill, they have nowhere else to go. What is going to happen to them is the question.
We are urging them to relocate south for their own safety.
They cannot relocate south, or they would have. So how will the IDF stay within the bounds of international law?
Sangita, the reason that people in the northern Gaza Strip haven't relocated south is that Hamas has physically set up roadblocks in order to stop them from leaving. Hamas wants to see civilian casualties inside the Gaza Strip because it wins propaganda points. And we're doing everything we can to protect our own civilians. By the way, Israel is full of IDPs, over 100,000 people who've been forced to leave their homes because they've been vacated away from the areas of danger. And we expect the same thing to happen in the Gaza Strip again, because we can't go back to 6 a.m. on October 7th. We can't go back to a world in which the jihadists of Hamas can invade us at will, abduct children from their beds, rape our girls, behead people, burn whole families alive in their homes. That will not happen. And that is why we know it's difficult. We know it's difficult. We know that the road ahead will be long and the road ahead will be hard. But we're doing everything we can, taking into account our obligations under international law, everything we can to urge civilians to get out of harm's way for their own safety, because this war must end with the defeat of Hamas.
You say that Israel is acting within the bounds of international law, and I'll be bringing my listeners an extended interview with one of 8 human rights and international law specialists, all of whom wrote an open letter to the Israeli government. And they begin their letter by saying, we write as Jews and we write also as experts, legal experts in the field. They include Lord Neuberger, who you will be aware is the former president of the UK Supreme Court, not a man who does not understand the law. They are very clear that what Israel is doing, with a combination of its siege, with a combination of bombing, and with a combination of asking 1.1 million people to flee, many of whom can't, they believe you are breaking international law, and you have put, as a result, Israel at risk of committing a war crime in the same way that the terror organization Hamas has.
No. I'm sorry, Sangita. On the morning of October 7th, Hamas death squads invaded Israel, seeking to murder as many people as possible. They took thermobaric weapons into family homes.
This is not a question of morality. It's a question of international law. No, this is not a moral relativism argument. It's about law.
Because I reject the moral equivalence you're trying to draw between Israel.
I am not trying to draw a moral equivalence, Eylon. I have just read to you. I have just read to you an extract from a letter that you can get. We can send it to you, written by leading eminent lawyers in this country. I am not making the point, they are, and it is a point of law, not moral equivalence. Please answer the question about law.
I take that point. Needless to say, we firmly disagree with that assessment, as have many other international lawyers, and I will gladly lay out the case. On October 7th, the Israeli people were the victims of an unprovoked act of aggression, a war crime, a crime against humanity with the atrocious massacre. Now, that triggers our right and our duty under international law to defend our people. The proportionate response, that exercise of self-defense, is to totally disarm the enemy that committed that atrocity so that it can never do it again. And we are pursuing that legitimate objective by striking legitimate military targets and by doing everything that we can under international law to urge civilians to leave. It's important to remember that the rules of international law were not written in order to favor jihadi terrorist organizations against democratic sovereign states. We take our obligations very seriously. Many international lawyers, including members of the House of Lords, have spoken very forcefully about Israel's right to dismantle Hamas in response to the October 7th massacre, a point that, by the way, former President of the United States, Barack Obama, just hours after the initial massacre, said the whole world must stand by Israel's side as it works to dismantle Hamas. That is a legitimate military aim. Now, unfortunately, people are going to suffer. That is the nature of war. It's the nature of a war that Hamas declared on us that we didn't want, we didn't start, we didn't expect. Suffering happens in war. And we plan to end this war so that there will be no more suffering, so that we can get out of this cycle of violence by ending the terror organization, the jihadi organization on our borders, meters away from our homes, so that it can no longer drag us into this cycle.
We have just had a leading expert in military strategy on the programme, and he says that because of the nature of Gaza and the densely populated territory and the tunnels and the human shield, the use of human shields by Hamas, it is possible that by escalating your bombardment, escalating ground incursions, Israel puts at risk the safety of the hostages, the Israeli hostages whose families desperately want them home alive.
I'm glad you're mentioning the hostages, because Israeli society at the moment is really sick with worry. We're a very small country, 10 million people. We have over 230 hostages. Everyone knows someone who has had someone close to them taken hostage, and we're talking about 230 people, including 33 children under the age of 18, 10 toddlers under the age of 5. And we are going to do everything we can to bring them home, because their abduction from their beds is a war crime. There are children whose parents were shot in front of them and abducted by a violent jihadist group that is holding them in a tunnel right now.
It is universally agreed. It is universally agreed that that is a war crime under international law. My question to you is the Israeli military strategy further endangering them? That's the question. And I know that you've given us a deadline with the time, which is why I'm rushing you.
We're demanding that their immediate and unconditional return. There have been 4 hostages who've been released so far.
But that was released through negotiation. That was released through negotiation.
Thanks to international pressure, not because Hamas suddenly decided to grow a humanitarian backbone. Thanks to pressure on Hamas and its supporters. And we're demanding more pressure be placed on Hamas and its supporters. And we know that if Israel were to step back, we would not see those hostages back. And I'll tell you how I know that. Because after the 2014 war, Hamas has been holding the bodies of 2 Israeli soldiers and 2 Israeli civilians. An Ethiopian Israeli called Avera Mengistu and a Bedouin Israeli, an Arab Muslim called Hisham Asayed, has been holding them hostage alive for all those years and has not given them back. So the prospect that Israel can stand back and negotiate for the hostages to be returned is not a realistic prospect.
Understood.
It's going to go after Hamas so it can no longer abduct our people again. That is an essential and legitimate goal of this war.
Understood. Your team did give us a deadline with time, so I'm just going to go over by just 1 minute, because this is an important question that my listeners have raised many, many times, and I undoubtedly will raise again today. They claim that what Israel is doing in terms of asking 1.1 million people to flee south and then continuing to bomb Khan Yunis and the Rafah crossing is tantamount to ethnic cleansing.
Sangita, that's an outrageous accusation. Israel is going after Hamas terror infrastructure, and I'll speak to Khan Yunis. On Thursday night, I think it was, Israel launched an airstrike in Khan Yunis against a Hamas rocket launcher that was wedged between a mosque and a kindergarten. Now, under international law, nobody disputes that that is a legitimate military target. And in response to the October 7th massacre, by the way, since then, Hamas has fired 8,000 rockets at us. I had to run to a bomb shelter twice yesterday. It is entirely legitimate for Israel to take out that infrastructure. So we're asking people to leave the north, because the north is where Hamas has most of its tunnels, and we're going to see the most intense fighting. But we've been clear this war is going to end with us destroying the whole of the Hamas infrastructure responsible for the October 7th massacre. Every tunnel, every rocket launcher, every Hamas commander, every single Hamas foot soldier, because this war cannot end with Hamas free to commit the atrocities it did on October 7th. It's not going to be like previous rounds.
You say this is targeted action.
We plan to win it.
You say this is targeted action and therefore is not ethnic cleansing. But over 7,000 Palestinians have now died in just 3 weeks. About 3,000 of those are children. That simply doesn't sound targeted.
Sangita, the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip as a result of Hamas declaring war on us is tragic. No one is disputing that. What we do dispute is the casualty figures presented by Hamas. The Gaza Health Ministry is Hamas. It's the jihadi organization that just a few weeks ago chopped people's heads off, raped little girls, burned whole families alive. So forgive us while we are a little bit skeptical about the numbers they're putting forward.
You may be numbers, but hang on a minute. Again, just a factual correction. Israel says that the Palestinian Health Ministry is run by Hamas. The health authority itself says that, in fact, the employees there are employees of Fatah, who run the West Bank. Fatah, the same group of Palestinian representatives who Israel says that it now wants to work with. My question to you is, 7,000 civilians have died in just 3 weeks. We have seen 1,400 Israelis killed in that terrible attack by Hamas that no one is condoning, certainly no one on this programme. Your actions cannot be viewed through the prism of being targeted enough, can they, according to a number of humanitarian organisations, including the NRC, who made that point on this show just a couple of minutes ago?
Sangita, in order to target the terror infrastructure inside the Gaza Strip, that can't be accomplished from the air. That's why Israel has called up the biggest ever mobilization of troops friends of mine who are now going to be in harm's way.
But 7,000 people, mostly civilians, have died in 3 weeks of bombing. The number is just going to increase.
And we hold Hamas, the jihadi organization that launched war against us with a campaign of beheadings, rape and burnings, to be entirely responsible for every civilian death, every tragic civilian death inside the Gaza Strip. There can be no equivalence drawn between Hamas, which hides behind its civilians to protect its military, and the Israeli people who are using their military to protect their civilians. We're doing everything we can to minimize civilian casualties.
I understand your point, Eylon. I understand your point, but just yesterday, the ambassador to the United Nations, the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, said that the United Nations can no longer be taken seriously and was defunct. And that is being interpreted by some as Israel's position being that international law is no longer a requirement for your democratic nation state.
Sangita, yesterday the United Nations passed a resolution that astonishingly did not mention Hamas once, did not condemn its terror attacks, and did not call for an immediate return of the hostages.
It condemned killing on both sides.
Now, 88 nations voted in favour of an amendment.
I've seen the text. It condemned killing on both sides. My question to you,
it did not mention Hamas, and it drew a mob. No, but please, I would like to respond to the point about the United Nations, because I think this is important. I don't think that a resolution passed by the likes of North Korea, Iran, and Russia has much moral authority.
It was 120 countries.
I remember that when Israel captured Nazi war criminal Adolf Eichmann, the United Nations condemned it. So when it comes to deciding how the Jewish people are going to deal with genocidal monsters who are openly vowing to murder every single one of us, the United Nations has no moral authority. We welcome the 88 nations that voted to firmly condemn Hamas' terror attack. We do not treat as a moral authority the likes of Russia, North Korea and Iran deciding to call for a ceasefire.
No, it was not a ceasefire. It was a humanitarian truce. And I do have to let you go now because I've hit up against breaks, and I've got in big red letters, Eylon, it says we need to break. But listen, just for the purposes of clarity for the audience, the UN resolution was for a humanitarian truce. It was passed by 120 countries, and the Israeli ambassador to the UN said that the United Nations no longer had any legitimacy or relevance. Eylon, I imagine we will speak again, and thank you for making time this afternoon